Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of...
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Big Ideas in Education. I am Dr. Sarah Boulos of Somerset Academy Schools, joined, of course, by my co-host Ryan Kairalla of Doral College. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Sarah. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. And we are fortunate to have a great couple of people on with us today, of course, as we are always excited when we get to welcome Mike Hernandez from Academica.
Hey, what's going on, Sarah? Hey, Ryan.
And we are especially fortunate to have a special guest with us today on to talk to us about some things that are going on right now here in South Florida and throughout Florida and some of the country is Shirrie Barany, Assistant Director for Special Education Services with Academica. Hi, Shirrie.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being with us today. So as I kind of alluded to, we are dealing with something right now going on almost as we speak, right, as we're recording. So to give you an idea, geographically, Mike, Ryan, and myself are located in South Florida. Shirrie, you are in North Florida.
Yeah.
And we are all dealing with or have recently dealt with the impact of Hurricane Ian, which hit landfall as we're recording just yesterday in Southwest Florida as a major hurricane. And we are dealing with school closures, with flooding, with tornadoes, with a whole lot of destruction and damage. And as educators, you know, it goes far beyond, do we take a day off from school? As we've mentioned on the show in the past, as educators, we provide a significant amount of support for our communities and families. And so we're really grateful that you could join us today, Shirrie, to talk a little bit about what parents, families, schools, school leaders, district leaders should be thinking about and working on as we're looking forward to recovery and eventually opening schools back up.
Yeah, so certainly I've been watching the news and noticed how many of our districts that our schools are supported, they are all closed. And I'm in Tallahassee where we still are functioning as usual. So, you know, it's putting a lens on like supporting the schools from a remote place and being able to offer, you know, any assistance or guidance of how we can help them navigate school closure and the things that they're going to have to prepare for, you know, following what happens with the storm.
Right. So if you are listening and you're not super familiar with Florida, it's a little strange maybe to consider that some parts of Florida might be completely underwater and some are not. I actually was on with like tech support for Apple earlier today, and they were like, are you okay? And I, you know, trying to explain to them how geographically distant some of us are. But even those who were getting prepared for the storm. So initially they were letting us know that Tampa Bay area needed to be completely evacuated anywhere in that coastal region. And Tampa Bay, for those who don't know, is little north of central Florida if you're looking at a map, and it's all the way on the west coast. It actually made landfall in a direct hit a bit further south in what we would consider southwest Florida, which is still a bit northwest of where Mike, Ryan, and myself are. So we were graciously, you know, missed in the harshest part of the storm, although in North Miami and Broward there were some tornadoes and some serious destruction going on there. But we're looking at the response now that entire parts of Southwest Florida, you know, Fort Myers, Punta Gorda, Captiva, Sanibel are just decimated. And the destruction is not completely calculated at this point. By the time you're listening to this, we will obviously have more information. But going into today and just looking at how we can help, I can only imagine we're thinking about, well, what do we do before a storm comes? How do we handle it while the storm is here? And what are some things we can be doing after looking forward? I know that's a lot of questions, but
Yeah, one of the biggest things I think to focus on is with the children, they harbor a lot of what they see their parents enduring. So if their parents are worried, they tend to feel nervous or insecure. And it's important to kind of monitor the amount of news we're watching. They see the devastation, they get nervous, but we have to build that resiliency in them to understand that there's hope. Things do get better after disasters. It takes time, and instill some, giving them guidance and reassurance that it's going to be okay. I mean, I do remember as a child going through storms, through Andrew when I was really little, and then in my mid 20s through Wilma. And it was interesting because I cried after Wilma when I saw the devastation of my house. It didn't affect me the same way when I saw Andrew. I just thought, oh, bad storm. But it was a different feeling. And so when your kids see you upset, they tend to be upset. My son gets very upset when he sees me sad. So it's really important to make sure that, the kids know our parents are being strong and are going to foster some support and resilience for them to know everything is going to be okay. We might have lost this, but we're safe. So we have to make sure that they feel safe.
so in a way, that's good advice for parents and adults who are working with students. Some of our kids are going to be with us during storms because schools sometimes become shelters. So, I know a lot of us think about how do we occupy their time. Simple things like puzzles and books and
Yes.
coloring and stickers seems silly, but I mean, I can tell you, even as an adult, it's, we try to create that atmosphere of let's hunker down now that we know that our basic necessities are fulfilled. Let's try to think of something that's not, dependent on power and electricity, that will occupy our energy so that we don't hyper focus on what's
Correct.
going on around us. So that's really
Spending
great advice.
Yeah, spending intentional time with one another is really important. There's also several actual children's books recommended by like the Pediatric Association. Some are wordless picture books that they go through. This is what happened with the storm, and then this is, it's basically sequencing everything and how at the end things get rebuilt, and it gives the hope. But yeah, I do agree that they do need to spend time with their families, and just like we did during pandemic closure, we all got to build a better bond, and that is one thing you can take out of the hard. After the storm, there will be a rainbow. You do spend time together and you get through it as a family.
And unfortunately, as educators and adults, we know that, not everyone does make it out okay. And we are looking at the real possibility that there will be fatalities and kids will be dealing with that loss. And that is a very intense trauma that they will be going through. And in areas that are more directly hit, we may be looking at a mass traumatic event. We've talked a bit on the show before about trauma-informed education, and I know you have a bit of background working with students who have been dealing with a lot of trauma. Can you give us some idea of it? And
So yeah, no, it's really interesting. I don't think that prior to my work experience up here in Northern Florida that I knew how many resources there actually were and how many community agencies to provide mental health support and assistance with trauma. And there's so many different agencies that are community based, and they can be accessed through your county websites, through it's just
There's a lot.
There's so many. I didn't realize that there were, and anytime I come across it, there's Camelot community based care that's throughout Florida. There's the Mental Health Council website, and they have a plethora of resources that people can reach out to, and it's free. And that's what's wonderful to know is all of these supports are free because mental health is become such a huge thing that we have to deal with, and especially now on top of all the other things we've been going through these past couple of years, to have a storm on top of it, it's bringing them back, like when things are closed or they don't have access to things that they did. Maybe they're worried about their education. Schools are going to be closed again. It's a trigger.
yes. And so we've talked about how schools can be such a calming, constant presence for students, right? So that having that consistency and that structure can be really therapeutic for a lot of kids. But it's good to know that those resources exist. As we are recording, I also wanted to put out there that another resource that exists that I just recently became aware of is even if you're having issues with connectivity, for example, not able to get phone Wi-Fi service. I received notification from AT&T saying, we are available to help. So it's really good to know that there are a lot of resources available, as you mentioned. And getting connected with others is really important. I know as someone who has experienced both as a student and an educator these kinds of experiences. I also was really young during Hurricane Andrew, and 2005 we had that string of just disasters go through with Katrina and Wilma. I know others that I'm not remembering the name of right now. I know a lot of us talk about, just going outside and meeting maybe our neighbors or people who live in our building that we hadn't met before, and connecting with others and seeing how can we support each other and provide some help, right? And I think that that's going to be a critical key as well, is connecting with others and seeing how you can band together and provide support.
Yeah.
So then shifting to when we are able to open schools again, I know there are resources for mental health that we're actually going to be linking in the show description. There's a lot of great resources there for educators. What can you tell us about when kids come back? What should we be thinking about?
Well, I think we should keep our eyes open to noticing any signs that they may be having difficulty, if they are they might change their appetite, their activity level, their engagement level, and be mindful of that, because they don't come in necessarily, children, and just tell you exactly what's going on. And it's also important to not say something to the effect of, oh, wasn't it great to have 2 days off? Because that 2 days off is different for some kids than others, on top of a storm. You don't know what they're dealing with at home already. So it's important to be very mindful of how words are phrased and making sure that, you are taking care of what you see. And that is also why the youth mental health first aid is so important, to make sure that we are paying attention to signs that a child might be in distress. And I know, just to go back, the My Florida Families website, it has a list of so many different services and access to resources. And I know that connectivity might be an issue, but they have all kinds of first responder resiliency, for economic support, for mental health, for abuse. The kids are going to be going through a lot if they've been, severely impacted by this. And we need to be mindful.
You mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. So the first thing I wanted to go back to was, you mentioned the youth mental health first aid. So for those of us who are not familiar, can you tell us what that is and how it's being implemented in schools right now?
So youth mental health first aid is a lot like how we look at when a child has a cut. What do? We put a Band-Aid on it, and then we get extra help. We assess what's going on, and then we act upon it, and we get the appropriate help. So the important thing to know that with youth mental health first aid is you are not necessarily a person who's going to fix the problem. You're going to be the person who helps to see the signs, see the symptoms, and then you're going to provide the guidance and the resources and help encourage that person to go get support. And that's why it's important, because it teaches us ways to identify someone who's in need.
And who is involved with the youth mental health first aid, and how is that being presented to schools right now?
So currently, Lily Salazar, who is my supervisor, she had me trained to be a trainer. So I am able to train others in youth mental health first aid. But through the school districts, they are responsible for providing training to all staff members, including cafeteria, paraprofessionals, anybody who works at the school. And the new House bill says 80% of the staff has to be trained by next year. So having that many eyes on all of the students and stakeholders. This is not just for children, it can be for adults alike and other coworkers that we have. It's really important because it's going to be more proactive instead of reactive for getting people the help that they might need.
Right. And so that being put into law, I think makes a pretty strong statement about the way that we want to address what is going on in our schools mental health wise, and having that many of our staff members and faculty involved in it, like you said, it's tremendous.
And we've made great progress because we've surveyed so many of our schools, and many are right there. They have their trainings and they have so many available people. And when they get trained, then they're learning who and where the resources are and learning. And then they're going, oh, I want to partner with community agencies so we can provide more support to our families. And it's not just mental health. They're finding all these ways that we can share resources so that kids can be successful.
So I wanted to go back to the second thing that you mentioned that I wanted to bring up, and it was the excellent point that these kinds of disasters, these kinds of trauma do not impact all kids equally. And specifically when we're talking about a storm of this magnitude, right, there are some families and schools that are going to be more prepared and some that are not. And in this situation here with Hurricane Ian, as I mentioned earlier, initially was considered to be going a bit further north. And so there were a number of communities that were just not prepared for the shift when it hit further south. And geographically, what does that mean for the communities that were hit?
Geographically, it definitely changed because the track did go through a lot of rural communities through Southwest Florida. Their infrastructure is not the same with technology, with the way the roadways are. There's a lot of dirt roads. There's a lot of animals and a lot of the homes are not made the same to code the way South Florida was built up after Andrew. Everything was concrete block. Up where I live, the houses are made of wood. You have a storm of Category 4, it's going to be catastrophic. And if they are not prepared or unable to be prepared, we need to be ready to provide them support. And it's going to take, everybody kind of giving what they can and then getting the support from FEMA and their school districts. And I'm eager to see how we're going to be able to support them.
Absolutely. And so going back, the conversation about connectivity and talking to your neighbor, that conversation changes significantly when your nearest neighbor may be miles away, right? Because you're in a very rural area and people are very spread out. You mentioned just before we got on the air that you mentioned Arcadia as one of the locations that was pretty directly impacted. And if somebody doesn't know about where we are in Florida and what that means, would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Arcadia is very rural. And, what that means is, assessing what's needed is going to be a little bit more challenging because you have to do more like search and rescue. It's not a heavily populated area. People tend to, be in their own little communities. It's going to be difficult to get to emergency medical care. They often operate on their own volunteer fire departments and that kind of thing. So, but they're helping their families. So it's definitely going to be difficult with connectivity. And I'm just, my hope is that everybody's okay, but my prayers are with them for what might be going on.
And so as educators, sometimes we see data put out there. So as educators, we might see that parts of Florida are the lowest performing. And we've talked about on the show how more often than not, that correlates directly with levels of income, right? And what the resources are in that area. And so as educators, I think a lot of us think about what kinds of support our families will need and our communities will need. And as you mentioned, we hope and pray that everyone is okay, but experience tells us that's likely not going to be the case. And so we want to be there to provide whatever we can as we kind of, the dust settles and we see what can we do.
Yeah. And, school districts play such an integral role in support when these things happen. Oftentimes, the schools are the shelter, and that's where the kids go. A school is the child's safe place as well as being at home, and that's what it should be. So, school districts will be, there for the families, and we play, like I said, we play an integral role in supporting those gaps when disasters happen. We provide the meals, we're providing so much love, with the kids, and trying to get them back on track, and know that education is important, but you cannot do certain things until your basic needs are met. And oftentimes that's where the school district steps in to make sure those things happen. Up here, that's what we were supporting with a lot of our students. We were getting their basic needs met, and then the education and everything had to come in. So we need to make sure that they have what they need first, and then address how we're going to get to that next level.
I'm curious about how all this connects with the work that you do on the special education student support side. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to what your next few weeks/months look like in terms of your day-to-day?
So, based on what transpires out of all of this, my support will be making sure that the students who might have special needs, they are getting the access that they need to their education. And it might look a lot different than how it would in a traditional school setting. So, we'll have to do a lot of creative strategic planning to make sure that we're giving the most appropriate service that we can give them for whatever their situation is. It's on a very individualized needs basis. And if they're having connectivity issues, that's going to be another thing. I can relate a lot of it to having a COVID closure in a school district that didn't have internet, which is, and a lot of the kids don't have the same access as in our urban areas. And we did a lot of phone calls. We did a lot of site visits out to the kids' homes and home visits. We worked a lot
Food
with
delivery. I
with
remember
food
that.
delivery. Yeah, we had school buses delivering the food. We had played with the idea of trying to have a mobile hotspot near a bus. So ours is really troubleshooting and figuring out how do we get the kids the access to their education that they need in very creative ways when they don't have that kind of resource available to them. So sometimes, I would go out with another coworker. We'd go out and make sure they had the food, they had clothes, but then we'd also make sure that they had the instruction they needed and what was the most important thing that we needed to get them to be able to grasp or skill for that moment. But it completely changes. So it's definitely going to be on an individual needs basis, how we look at who needs what and in what way.
Shirrie, I wanted to ask a question because I was looking at this article from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, particularly after the storm, and they were giving some really good tips about how children often turn to adults for information, for comfort and help.
Mhm.
And one of the things that they said to assist children, they gave a lot of great points, but I wanted to bring 2 points, and I wanted to get your opinion about the balance between these two. So the first one is provide accurate information to their children about what happened during the storm, as
Mhm.
well as what changes the family is facing. Answer questions honestly, but with the amount of detail appropriate to their developmental level. And then in the same area, it says monitor the media and social media
Mhm.
information children are viewing and set limits if children are overly focused on viewing this content. So we're in obviously an overstimulated world now with phones and all these things. And I know we're just talking about connectivity, which if you're disconnected for a long time, that can leave a lot of anxiety of wanting to find out what's going on.
Mhm.
How do you think that parents, and more importantly as well, when they get back to the school, how should they approach this topic when dealing with
Yeah,
children.
that danger of over connectivity.
I agree. I definitely think that, the things can be addressed, but sometimes less is more. You don't need to go necessarily into all of those details, especially when you're not knowing on the first return of the students what they've gone through. So if you just jump right into certain things, it can be triggering for them. And it is important to monitor, the news media. That's what their job is. Their job is to put it out there to get the reactions for things. And unfortunately, it doesn't always, amount to the best thing for the child. So, fact-based, absolutely. Keep it appropriate. So you don't need to go into all the details of what, exactly transpired for someone else, a death or anything like that. But you could teach them about what a hurricane is, or, like how put the science behind it and be like, oh, this is what a hurricane does, and talk about the preparedness and what happens afterward, and be factual. And, discuss basically, how to be resilient afterwards. Just like with any other type of disaster, you want to talk about, how do we rebuild? Let's work on moving forward, because we don't want to be stagnant and keeping them harboring the anxiety and worry that they might be seeing.
So you keep them informed, but you keep them confident.
Yeah, you absolutely do.
I think
love that.
is consistent with a lot of recommendations when we have other natural disasters or maybe mass traumatic events. We want kids to know that there is a structure in place, right? Like there is a system of support that will be there moving forward, whether it's a political event or, natural event, natural disaster. There are things that we as the adults, there's a sense of, I'm trying to
You want to keep, you want to keep as much predictability as possible.
Exactly.
And you want to, okay, well, our routines are going to change. Let's talk about how this is going to work tomorrow, so that they know, that's a big strategy we use with students with special needs because of anxiety and everything. They have to know what's going to happen because there's a lot of fear in children when they see us all worrying. So you want to keep that predictability. Okay, well, we don't have power today. Tomorrow we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We don't have water, and like teaching new tasks and routines until, that will help them adapt. So having some form of that predictability in a most unpredictable situation, I think is going to definitely support them.
Thank you so much, Shirrie. This has been really helpful and really informative. We're so grateful to have you on today. Again, this is Shirrie Barany, the Assistant Director for Special Education Services with Academica, and you've shared a bunch of resources. We're also going to have a lot of resources available in the show notes, or in the description notes for this episode. If you are in this path, if you are in this area, please know that our hearts are with you, and we're hoping that we can support in any way in the tiny sphere of influence we have by providing this episode. We wanted to do that. Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you are safe and that you are well.
Thank you.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.